Hey guys, my name is Julie. I am a third year medical student, and I thought I would give some advice on term 2 since I did pretty well. I'm actually going to hide my camera for this one because otherwise when I go to the next slide, it's going to cut things off for you. So term 2, in my opinion, is a little bit easier than term 1. I think the physiology in term 1 is much harder. So this is kind of a nice easier term that hopefully you guys feel the same way. So just my general advice, what I did for almost every exam are these things right here. So I pre-read. What that means is usually the night before I would take like 15, 30 minutes top and just skim through the lecture. I wouldn't really sit there and read and try and understand anything. Maybe I would highlight a little bit, but I spent no more than 15 to 30 minutes. It's just very quick. You just want to get an idea of what you're going to be learning the next day. So then I always went to lecture. Lecture for me, because I always had the first lecture. I wasn't the person, sitting in the back listening to the morning lectures. I never had that luxury. I mean, you could do it either way. I typically just sat in lecture and took notes and paid attention, but either way works. But after lecture, I would do what was my post reading. And what that included for me was basically going through the lecture again and taking my own notes. So this is something I call my quick notes now. Initially in term 1, 2, I was doing all of this in a notebook, my own notes. What I actually figured out that in term 3, 4, and 5 is making notes in OneNote is so much better. I mean, you can search for keywords. It's just easier. I mean, you can make your notes super fun. Yeah, so definitely, get an iPad or have some kind of tablet if you can, and do notes electronically. It's so much nicer and just less paper use. The other thing I really, really loved that I think kind of set me into a great position, even for term 1, was that I watched the physio videos for almost all physiology. So for endocrine and neuro, I watched every single video. And during those videos, it would either be, after lecture, after I kind of started my notes, or that night, maybe even the next day if, things took too long. But I watched every one for the topics that, we covered that day sometime, typically that day, but maybe the next day, maybe on that weekend. And physio, why I like it so much better than Boards and Beyond is the guy who does the videos, he is drawing things out, he's really explaining things. And usually at the end of the videos, he breaks down, 2 to 3 questions, and they always show up, in my opinion, as test questions. Maybe not the exact same, stem of 28-year-old woman, blah blah blah, comes in for this and that, but the concepts that he breaks down are the exact same that show up on the test. So I think having that really helped me, one, for my critical thinking skills, and 2, I had seen a lot of topics come up and how to approach them just from the physio videos, and that really helped me on exam day. The other thing I loved was there's a DES group called SNL, and he was one term above me, and he made like an exam for almost every term. So typically I would go to his DES group, I would see if he made a test, and I would do it. And most of the time I would try to do it twice. So the first time, I would say maybe I was in the 80s, something like that. And I typically do that about the week before the test. And then that weekend of the test, so like, Saturday night, I would do the whole test again. So erased everything, do it all over again. And I would make sure, I would try my best to get above a 90. Some other tips, less is more. I get so many people who ask me, this person told me read all of first aid. This person says sketchy. This person really loves Boards and Beyond. What you need to do is not get caught up in what everyone else is doing. It is so hard to feel that, fear of missing out, or, you're not learning the best because X, Y, and Z is doing this, this, and this. Find a routine and a schedule that works for you. For me, it was the pre-read, post-read, and physio. I didn't watch Boards and Beyond. I wasn't really going to first aid and reading old chapters. I did use first aid to, maybe reference something or to check on a chart or mnemonic, but that was not like a staple in my study routine at all. So everybody is different and everybody learns differently. The guy in Boards and Beyond, he really just seems to like lecture to me. He reads the slides and underlines. He doesn't really draw things out or, I'm very visual. So if you're the same way, give physio a shot, or try something else. But just because you don't use the same resources as all of your buddies doesn't mean, you're not getting the same learning. So the first test, endocrine and reproduction. This test comes up quick because it's, I think, only 3 weeks long for the study period. So it comes up fast, especially when the term starts. You're kind of see, the same type of things for my things I do the same. I always recommend doing your own notes. Writing something in your own handwriting is so beneficial and it makes the learning so much more active when you write it yourself. Also, when you come back to review those notes, it's so much easier to remember something that you've written in your own handwriting, in your own words, than it is to write, than it is to remember something that someone else has done. Physio videos. I mean, these were bread and butter for me for term 1, term 2, term 3. I absolutely love them. I love the visuals. I love the drawing out. I love the talking out of concepts and the practice questions that are within videos. So that was something I think that really kind of set me in a great position. IMCQs. I think people hate on these too much. Do I think some are poorly written? Absolutely. But I think the concepts that SGU uses for exams are all there pretty much. If you can do IMCQs, so how I did it is, say we had an IMCQ Wednesday. That weekend, I would redo that IMCQ. And I kind of have an example of what I mean by redoing an IMCQ too. When I answer an IMCQ the second time, I am also answering why is A wrong? Why is B wrong? Why is C right? All those things go into, the steps of redoing an IMCQ. And then I would do every IMCQ. Sometimes you get more practice questions that they assign, but I would really do every IMCQ the weekend after we had it. And then the last weekend before the test, I redid them all again. The benefit to that is the concepts that SGU tests you on are the same ones they put in IMCQ. Those are the highest yield topics. So I tried to hit and hammer on those as much as I could. The other thing I really loved was I would look at the quizzes the last weekend just before every exam. It just helped to keep things fresh. You actually get explanations with them now. So it's really beneficial to see those tougher questions. Things I would change, in general, I think more practice questions are better because you can learn something, so well inside and out. But if you can't apply it to anything, well, that doesn't really help at all, does it? Because on test day, if you can't answer the question, it doesn't matter if you read every page in the BRS book. And then one other thing, so for physio, for the reproduction specifically, I did not watch, I watched everything for endocrine and neuro, but for repro, I didn't watch them all. And I wish I would have done that just because, pregnancy and some of those concepts, they're so intricate. It would have been nice to have, a second pass and kind of a different, deeper explanation into concepts. So this is an example. Obviously, this one isn't an IMCQ. This is just a practice question that's one of the doctors had posted, but this is kind of the same concept of how I do my IMCQs when I redo them. I'm writing things out. I'm making sure I'm practicing my highlighting. I'm, telling myself what are the key things in here? How do I explain this to be right? What are things that they could ask me again? What does Addison's disease look like? So I try to make these as, interactive and, active learning as possible. The worst thing you could do is just passively go through these things and just circle answers and not really understand why those are the correct answer. This was by far my favorite exam in all of SGU. Before I went to school, I worked as a researcher. So I just, biochem in general is just fun and seems like research to me. So I loved this test. Again, making your own notes. I whiteboarded a lot for this exam, specifically things like the Krebs cycle, things like glycolysis. And this would probably be, one of the few times that I use first aid just to kind of help me draw things out, because they have all the, pathways together really nicely in first aid. So I would use that kind of as a guide. And then anything from lecture from first aid, I would kind of put together my whiteboard and into my notes. Reviewing all the quizzes again. One other big thing for this test specifically is there is a document that has 700 IMCQ questions in it. That's what it is. And it's phenomenal. So how I actually did this is I got the document from someone and I broke it up into 130, 150 chunks. So basically an exam. And towards the end, towards when the test is coming, maybe the week, 2 weeks before, I started breaking this up and doing it. Anything I got less than an 80%. So any of those chunks I got less than 80%, I redid. And these questions too, I mean, if you do 700 questions plus reviewing your quizzes and IMCQs during the week, I mean, you've done probably close to 1,000 questions. They can only ask you something so many ways. If you have attacked that question in every way possible, it's very hard that you would, you probably wouldn't get it wrong on the test because you've answered that question, 5-6 times. Just some tips. So the biggest thing that I think people struggle with is, nomenclature. If you don't understand what the enzyme does, it's very hard to make an educated guess. So for example, kinase and phosphorylase, those add phosphate. So if you're talking about glycolysis, for example, and which one of these enzymes could make ATP, a best guess would be something that ends with a kinase, because I'm going to be adding a phosphate to it. So for example, pyruvate kinase makes an ATP and has a kinase in the end of the name. Phosphatases, for example, they will remove phosphate. There's actually a really good chart in first aid too. I think that breaks down nomenclature and stuff like that. But, that is one big thing I think people take for granted. If you don't understand the nomenclature, it's very hard to make educated guesses on this test. And like I said, this is one of the few instances I did use first aid, and it was mainly to give me a big picture, kind of a reference for how I should start my whiteboarding. Do they have any mnemonics, things to help me to integrate with my own notes, not to use as the sole resource, but to help me, understand things a little bit better. So again, here's an example of a quiz. And when I read you quizzes, kind of the same thing. Focusing on highlighting, I'm answering all the other options, or I'm explaining something to myself for why this makes sense. And then here is an example of one of my whiteboards. So obviously this is glycolysis, and I put everything into this one whiteboard that I could, so you can get the whole entire picture, glucose 6-phosphate going into the pentose phosphate pathway, going into gluconeogenesis, what step is irreversible, which one is reversible, where is the rate limiting enzyme, all those factors. If you put it all into one chart, it kind of helps integrate things together. So I can see glycolysis will move into Krebs cycle, or glucose 6-phosphate can go into gluconeogenesis and the pentose phosphate. Now where does that take me? The more you put things together, the easier it is to understand concepts and processes and all those things, because it's so hard to just memorize this, and it also helps put it together of what are the key concepts, where are the irreversible steps? That's what they're going to ask you about. Where is substrate level phosphorylation? That's what they're going to ask you about. They're not going to ask you about, some enzyme that has no external process or secondary purpose to it. They're going to ask you about where's ATP being made? Where's the rate limiting enzyme? If I have a defect here, is that going to give me a disease? Those are the things they want you to know. Neuro 1. So this test, I don't think it was the hardest. It was my worst grade, but I'll blame my friends and family for that because they did come to visit me during this time. So the last week was a little rough in my studying. One thing, obviously, notes again. So I started doing a little bit of the OneNote, still was in the notebook, but I wish I would have transferred everything completely to OneNote instead of using a notebook. So again, making your own notes, it's huge in just the retention process. So things I would do different for this one, I would redo my IMCQs, review my notes more, but also practice questions, understanding cranial nerves, imaging, different defects and lesions in nerves. A lot of that is just comes with application. So practice questions, repetition, getting down just kind of key findings. If I have hoarseness, for example, I'm probably thinking I have a cranial nerve 10 or cranial nerve 9 somewhere that's, has a defect. There's a lot of things that you can pick up just by doing multiple questions. So the second exam for us is TRACTS. So we had cranial nerves in the first test and like CT imaging on the first test. Neuro 2 was TRACTS. Obviously some cranial nerves, for our repeat questions, but it was mainly TRACTS, lesions in the spinal cord, neurodegenerative diseases. So this exam was by far the worst for people's average. Somehow I did extremely well in this. So what I personally did, obviously made my own notes, I did the IMCQs, but watching the physiology on neuro was, I think, the key to my success here. They truly walked you through, Brown-Séquard, the different levels of the spinal cord, all the types of lesions, Wallenberg, so lateral medullary syndrome, lateral pontine syndrome, all those things are walked through with practice questions in the video. So I had been practicing applying the knowledge, from day one, and that I think truly helped me. The other thing is, I think people get really bogged down on looking at symptoms as a whole instead of kind of picking out little, isolated symptoms. So for example, if I have ipsilateral, loss of pain and temperature, ipsilateral Horner's, and then I have hoarseness, well, the hoarseness is telling me, I have some cranial nerve 9, 10 deficit. And so because of the hoarseness, you'd be thinking lateral medullary syndrome, because ipsilateral pain and temperature, ipsilateral Horner's, that's kind of non-specific because that could still lead me to a lateral pontine syndrome. But when you start talking about hoarseness, you're with the lateral medullary syndrome. If they were talking about, problems with the face, so facial drooping, loss of sensation to the, if you lose sensation to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, those are cranial nerve 7 deficits. So that facial droop would lead me more to a lateral pontine syndrome. So hoarseness, face problems, like those are isolated symptoms that you can pick out of your group of systems to pick out truly where your lesion is. Neuro 3, behavioral science. So this test is pretty tough in my opinion, and a lot of it has to do with timelines. So some of my tips for this is really hammer home the specific timelines. So for example, major depressive disorder, you have to have that, for at least 2 weeks, and you need to have the SIGI caps, mnemonic, so they have to have all these different symptoms, and some of that stuff just becomes so much to remember. Same thing for schizophreniform versus schizophrenia. You have to remember the time frame. If it's less than 6 months, well, it can't be schizophrenia. The other thing is bulimics versus anorexia. So bulimics will typically have normal or increased BMI. Anorexia will have a decreased BMI, and it has to be less than 18.5. When you start talking about kids, it's a little different. You have to calculate the weight versus height and all that, but typically these are just things that you have to get down timelines and requirements for what a true diagnosis is. So I thought this test was, kind of tough in just keeping all of that straight. And then my best advice is please make your own notes, redo the IMCQs and then quizzes. The other thing I did do for this test is I did do some USMLE RX practice questions just on behavioral science. And I thought that was pretty helpful, just, getting more repetition for these types of questions. So again, here's kind of an example of what my quick notes look like. And it's probably a little hard to see for you guys, but I'm putting in a timeline. I'm putting in, what I would be looking for in the patient, different symptoms, what is a requirement they have to have. And I, color code things. So characteristics are in green, my definitions of what this disease is up here, in red. And obviously do it your own way, but that's just how it works for me. It helps me put things together in my mind. If I color code it, if I have things underlined, if I square them off, if I circle them. So, find a systematic approach for you to making questions or for making notes. And it also helps with just the speed. Like I get a lot of times people come and tell me, gosh, taking notes it takes so much time. How could you do it? It does take a lot of time. It really does. But the more you do it, the faster you get at it. So I could not do notes maybe for say two days. And by the weekend, I could make all those up because you just get so much faster at it the more you do it. And then again, when I'm doing practice questions, I'm focusing on timelines. I'm making myself aware again of what is the criteria that I need to meet to get this disease. And they, did they have it? Yes or no? And writing it all out. And then the BSCE. So for BSCE, when you actually get the score, you're going to get some chart like this. Basically, if you're above the line, you did above average. If you're below the line, you did below average. So if you're right at the line, some of this is average here. So these are the topics, especially the ones that trail more often to the lower performance. For me, MSK, I've always known I sucked at that. That's something you want to go back to, and maybe over break if you want to be that productive, or maybe just in the next term 4, term 3, term 4, term 5. Those are the things you want to slowly try to integrate and kind of get better at. My advice for this though is if you have below an 83% average, just focus on regular exams. The BSCE is curved. So most people do not fail this test. And if any, it really should not bring your grade down because it's curved so heavily. It's much easier to do worse, I would say, on Neuro 3, so the behavioral science, than it is to do poorly on the BSCE. So if you are at that 83% or above, my strategies were like this. I knew that, CPR would be tested heavily. And those were, probably my lower subjects. I was really good at biochem. I was good at neuro, so I never went back to neuro. One, because it was in term 2, so I just learned it. Biochem also was from this term, but CPR was obviously the oldest stuff and just stuff I really wanted to go over again. So I reviewed my notes. I did a bunch of RX questions just on CPR, just the physiology. And then I typically did anywhere from 7 to 10 hours a week. So I just, my goal was always 1 hour a day. Could I get 1 hour a day to just review CPR? Most of the time I did. And sometimes I would go back and I would just watch, 2 physio videos on just say pulmonary physiology, cardiophysiology, Wigger's diagram. I would just go back and review those things. But yeah, I mean, term 2 is fun. Definitely take time to do something you enjoy too. For me, I played intramural basketball. I played volleyball once in a while, but you have to have some kind of mental release too, because if you get caught up with just studying, 12 hours a day, every day, I mean, by the end of the term, you just hate yourself, So please do something, meditate, exercise, play sports, hang out with your friends, do something, for a little bit every day that just helps you de-stress and have a little fun, because yeah, this is stressful, and you know, all of it is important, but your mental health is important too. So definitely take time for that. If anyone has any questions too, you can always shoot me a message. You can message me on Facebook, and I'll always get back to you, typically within a day. So, and then if you haven't heard, I partnered with Amboss to kind of run a little series called The Breakdown. I post a video every Thursday to my YouTube channel and Instagram. And what we do is I break down, you know, how to use test taking skills to answer questions. So a lot of people, you know, they're stuck at, say, you know, the 220 to 230s range, 240 range for STEP. And a lot of that getting to the top tier, the top 25% of students, you know, if you want to get up there, is test taking skill. It's not so much a knowledge gap. It's, can you critically think and use your own test taking skills, you know, highlighting, process of elimination, summarizing the question to get to that right answer. So that's something I'm trying to focus on and bring to people at SGU. So if you like this video, please give it a like. Please shoot me a message and let me know you liked it. And yeah, I'm going to be posting term 3, term 4 videos as well, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. And hope you guys have a great holiday.